It's 2025 now. 23 years have crawled by since that night. 23 years since the silence became the loudest sound in my life. Every day the world spins on, oblivious to the fractured reality I've been living in. A reality carved out of a nightmare, cemented by a truth so grotesque it still curdles my blood. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of my son John. Johnny, my bright, curious, unsuspecting little boy, and the monster who stole him. I'm telling this now because the weight of it, the silence of it, has become unbearable. I've lived with the ghosts of that night, with the phantom scent of fear, with the echo of a scream that never came, for too long. It's time the world heard about the smiling face of evil and the rot that can fester even within the halls of justice. This isn't just a story. This is what truly happened in Sarasota in 2002. July 6, 2002. It was a Saturday night, Johnny's 13th birthday. He'd turned 13 that week, a milestone I'd envisioned celebrating with laughter, cake, and maybe a trip to the beach. Instead, we ended up at the local fair. A small, traveling circus had set up on the outskirts of town, and Johnny, with that boundless energy only a 13-year-old boy possesses, had been begging to go. Lisa, my estranged wife, John's mother, 30 years old then, and already a shadow of the woman I'd married, the court had just finalized their decision. Unfit for custody. Not because she was malicious, but because the darkness inside her had grown too large, too consuming. Depression had swallowed her whole, leaving behind a husk of the vibrant Lisa I once knew. We were separated, living in different houses, the custody battle a bitter, ongoing wound. I hadn't wanted her there that night, the tension, the arguments. But Johnny, my sweet Johnny, had insisted. He just wanted his mom and dad together, even if just for an evening, even if it was a fractured family at a makeshift circus. It was his birthday wish. How could I say no to that? The air that night hung heavy with the cloying scent of stale popcorn, diesel fumes, and something else. Something metallic, almost like old blood. I remember looking at Lisa as she gripped Johnny's hand, a desperate, forced smile plastered on her face. Trying to play the part of the perfect mother she was no longer deemed to be. And then, he appeared. He was a clown, of course he was. White painted face, exaggerated red smile that stretched too wide, too high, and eyes that held something. Cold, but not cold in the way of a professional performer. Cold in the way a predator's eyes are cold. He was tall, mid-40s I'd guess, with hands that seemed too large for the ruffled sleeves of his cheap costume. Donnie, captivated by the bright colors and the booming laugh, tugged Lisa towards him. "Look, Mom, it's Giggles," Johnny exclaimed, eyes wide with the innocent wonder of a child. Lisa, in her desperate attempt to win Johnny's affection and, I suppose, prove something to me, knelt down and said, "He likes you, Johnny. Go on, say hello." I remember the unease that pricked at me. Lisa maybe not, I'd mumbled an immediate, unreasoning aversion twisting in my gut. But she ignored me, pushing Johnny gently forward. I was about to interject more forcefully when Johnny suddenly craved cotton candy, and in a moment of weakness, I turned to go buy him some. A momentary lapse, a fatal lapse. When I returned, sticky cotton candy in hand, Lisa was still there, but the clown and Johnny were gone. "Where's Johnny?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Lisa blinked, that forced smile still on her face. Giggles took him to see the elephants. He said he had a special trick. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through me. My hand crushed the cotton candy. "Lisa, you let him go with a stranger?" "He's a clown, Daniel. It's a circus, and Johnny liked him. I was just showing him I'm a good mom." Her voice rose, defensive, cracking under the thin veneer of composure. I dropped the cotton candy and ran. I ran through the crowds, the distorted carnival music, the flashing lights, searching frantically for a glimpse of red nose, white face, or Johnny's excited grin. But he was nowhere. I found the elephant tent. Empty. I ran to the main tent. Empty. The clown. Giggles. No one seemed to know him. No one remembered a clown matching that description. My panic became a screaming terror in my chest. Just when I thought I'd lost him forever, I saw him. Johnny came walking back through the crowd, cotton candy in one hand, the other gripping that clown's sleeve. Giggles, that damn painted face. I froze. Lisa nudged me, that smug look already forming. "See," she said, arms crossed. "He just took him to see the elephants. You always think I'm wrong?" Johnny was laughing, that full, unfiltered kind of laugh kids only have when they feel safe. Giggles was nodding along, pointing to something behind them, animated, charming, like he hadn't just walked off with our kid unannounced. I was ready to confront him, to say something, but then I saw Johnny's face. Pure joy, eyes lit up, sticky fingers gripping the clown's sleeve, like it was his favorite uncle. For a second, I let myself breathe. Giggles caught my eye, smiled. Wide, but not too wide this time. "You've got a beautiful boy," he said, voice smooth, bright, kind. "You two must be proud." Lisa smiled like she'd just been proven right in a courtroom. And me, I just stood there, tension slipping away to easily. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe I'd let the divorce, the stress, the fear, maybe it had clouded my judgment. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Thanks for looking out for him." "Of course," the clown said, tipping an imaginary hat. "Gotta make sure the birthday boy has a good time." I took Johnny's hand, said goodbye to Lisa with a polite nod, and led my boy out of the fair. He talked all the way home about elephants, clowns, and magic tricks. I smiled. I even laughed, that dark pit in my gut. The one that screamed something was wrong, quieted just enough to ignore. And that was the mistake. That was the moment I chose peace over instinct. Never imagined it then. But the clown didn't vanish that night. Followed. He changed his name. And in just a few days, he re-entered my boy's life as Mr. Miller, and Johnny welcomed him like an old friend. That was just the prelude. The true horror unfolded days later in the suffocating silence of my own home. The clock radio glowed yellow in the dark, 2:12 a.m. The numbers burned into my memory like a brand. I'd woken up, needing the washroom, my bladder aching. Just another normal night, except it wasn't. Johnny was afraid of the dark. Always had been. If he woke up in the middle of the night, if he needed to go to the washroom, he'd pad across the hall, a small, sleepy shadow, and gently shake my shoulder. "Dad, can you turn the light on?" Or "Dad, can you wait outside the door?" But tonight, the house was silent. Too silent. My own bed felt too empty, too cold. The familiar weight of a small, sleeping form wasn't there. I blinked, trying to clear the sleep from my eyes, trying to make sense of the growing knot in my stomach. No, that wasn't right. Johnny's bed was in the other room. He always came to my room. A sudden, sharp bolt of fear shot through me. I was awake now, fully terrifyingly awake. I stumbled out of bed, my heart already hammering against my ribs. The hallway was a tunnel of oppressive darkness. "Johnny," I whispered, my voice rough, cracking. No answer. My hand fumbled for the light switch, flipping it on. The sudden burst of light did nothing to dispel the growing dread. I moved to Johnny's room. His door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The moonlight, usually a comforting glow through his window, now seemed to cast long, menacing shadows across his untouched bed. The sheets were still, unrumpled. His favorite superhero action figure lay precisely where he'd left it on the nightstand. He wasn't there. My breath hitched. Panic, raw and unadulterated, seized me. "Johnny," I called louder, my voice rising to a frantic shout. I tore through his room, then mine, then the living room, the kitchen, the dining room. Every empty space screamed his absence. His Nintendo handheld lay discarded by the sofa, still on, a silent testament to a boy who had simply vanished. The front door. My mind screamed it. I rushed to it. It was closed, but as my hand reached for the lock, my blood ran cold. It wasn't locked. Not latched, not deadbolted. Just closed. A cold shiver, colder than the deepest winter, traced a path down my spine. I tore out of the house, barefoot, onto the street. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. The wind whispered through the trees, mocking my frantic cries. "Johnny, John." My voice cracked, raw with terror. No answer, just the mocking silence of the empty street. My phone trembled in my hand as I dialed 911. My fingers fumbled, sweat slicking the screen. 911. "What's your emergency?" a calm voice asked. "My son. He's gone. He's gone. My son is missing." My voice was a desperate, choking sob. I remember screaming the address, screaming his name, screaming the word kidnapped over and over again, even though I had no proof, just an instinct. A father's chilling, undeniable instinct. Minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. Red and blue lights painted my quiet street in a macabre, flashing tableau. The police had arrived, and with them, a false sense of hope that would soon be crushed. They arrived quickly, too quickly, it seemed, for the endless minutes I'd spent screaming his name into the void. Uniformed officers, solemn faces. They started asking questions. The same questions, over and over. When did you last see him? Who was with him? Any enemies? Any disputes? What about his mother? Lisa arrived not long after, drawn by the flashing lights and the mounting chaos. Her face was a mask of confusion, then slowly a dawning horror. The questions turned to her, sharper, more accusatory. Her fragile composure shattered. She sobbed, protested her innocence, mumbled about the clown at the circus in panic. The officers looked at each other. Clown at a carnival that had packed up days ago. It sounded ludicrous, especially from a woman the courts had just deemed mentally unfit. Officer Jake. He was the lead detective, a man in his late 30s with sharp, observant eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Or so I thought. He had a brusque manner, a dismissive wave of the hand when Lisa started rambling about giggles. He focused on me, on the unlocked front door, on the custody dispute. He asked about my alibi, about Lisa's. The initial concern in his eyes seemed to morph into suspicion. "Mr. Daniel," he'd said, his voice flat, "a lot of these cases turn out to be a child runaway or a parent hiding them. We'll put out an alert, but don't expect miracles." A runaway? My Johnny afraid of the dark, who wouldn't even go to the bathroom alone? The idea was absurd, insulting. But Jake dismissed my protests. He seemed to have a narrative already formed in his mind. A troubled family, a custody battle, a boy caught in the middle. It was simpler, easier. Days bled into weeks. The initial surge of police activity dwindled. Missing posters went up, their vibrant colors fading under the relentless Sarasota sun. The tip line remained silent. Every phone call I made, every desperate plea for an update, was met with polite but firm resistance. Or worse, with Officer Jake's weary voice, hinting at my lack of cooperation or Lisa's instability. They weren't looking for a monster. They were looking for a simple explanation, a messy family dispute they could wrap up neatly. Lisa, meanwhile, spiraled, the accusations, the guilt, the crushing weight of Johnny's absence. She would sit in her apartment, staring blankly at the wall, sometimes murmuring Johnny's name, sometimes sobbing uncontrollably. The distance between us, once a physical separation, became an unbridgeable chasm of grief and unspoken accusations. 5 days crawled by. 5 days of waking up to an empty house. 5 days of my heart being a raw, exposed nerve. The police had exhausted their leads. They were ready to close the case as a potential runaway, or worse, an undisclosed parental abduction. Officer Jake had even suggested I prepare for the worst, his voice devoid of any real empathy. It was clear they had failed, or perhaps they hadn't even tried. I couldn't accept it. Johnny was out there somewhere. He had to be. My last hope was a private detective. Mark D. He was a grizzled man, late 50s, with tired eyes that had seen too much, but also a sharp, unwavering gaze that inspired a flicker of trust. I'd pooled every last penny, emptied my savings, mortgaged what little I had left. I had to find Johnny. Mark D. started from scratch. He didn't care about police theories or Lisa's instability. He cared about facts. He reviewed the police reports, talked to neighbors, and then, crucially, he went to Johnny's school. That's where he found Amelia and Richard, Johnny's friends. Almost the same age as Johnny. The police hadn't bothered with them, dismissing them as just kids. But Mark D. understood that kids see things adults miss. Their interrogations with Mark D. happened away from the prying eyes of the police, in a quiet park, with their parents present, and what they told him. What they told him turned my cold dread into a freezing, paralyzing terror. Amelia spoke first, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. Johnny made a new friend, Mr. Miller. A few weeks ago, maybe 12, 15 days before he disappeared. Richard chimed in, his voice small, nervous. Yeah, he was creepy, too friendly, middle-aged, you know. He'd just show up when we were playing at the park. He'd bring Johnny toys, candy. A cold wave washed over me. A middle-aged man, bringing gifts. Why hadn't Johnny told me? Why hadn't I noticed? The guilt was a suffocating blanket. Then came the second revelation. The one that hit like a physical blow. Amelia continued, her voice barely a whisper. A few days after that, when you, Mr. Daniel, went on a date, me and Richard were playing hide and seek at Johnny's house. You know, in the backyard, my blood ran cold. I remembered that night. I'd left Johnny alone for a few hours, a decision I would forever regret. It was Johnny's turn to hide first. Richard picked up, his eyes wide. Amelia had to find him and me. Amelia nodded. I was counting, and when I opened my eyes, I looked everywhere. Finally, I found Johnny. She paused, took a shaky breath. He was in the shed in the backyard. He wasn't alone. The creepy man was there, Richard finished, his voice trembling. They were just sitting. Johnny was giggling. A middle-aged man, hiding with my son in our backyard shed while I was out on a date. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of sinister intent that made my stomach churn. This wasn't a random kidnapping. This was planned. This monster had been stalking my son. And Johnny, in his innocent, trusting way, had seen him as a friend. Mark D. worked tirelessly. He revisited the circus grounds not for clues of a clown, but for any lingering evidence of a man who looked like the description Amelia and Richard had given. He dug into local missing persons reports, searching for patterns, for anything the police had overlooked. And his focus increasingly shifted towards one particular individual. A circus performer who had packed up and left town abruptly right after Johnny's disappearance. A man who occasionally worked as a children's entertainer at local events. A man named Cyrus. For days after Mark D's arrival, the case exploded. It's not for us, not for Johnny's case, but for another family. Another boy, a 10-year-old, disappeared from a neighboring town, less than 50 miles away. The pattern was horrifyingly familiar. But this time, something was different. The boy's parents had installed a new CCTV camera system, pointed directly at their backyard gate. The footage was grainy, but it was there. A man, no mask, no makeup, slipping through the gate. He moved with a disturbing grace for someone his size. He was carrying something heavy, something that squirmed. The terror that image conveyed was absolute. And then, he looked directly at the camera, just for a second. The chilling, empty gaze of a predator. The police immediately put out an All Points bulletin. The news channels plastered his face everywhere. He was clean-shaven, ordinary-looking, perhaps a bit gaunt, but without the painted smile, he looked disturbingly mundane. A face you might pass on the street without a second glance. The public screamed for justice. That night, everything changed. A phone call. Mark D's voice, tight with a mixture of grim satisfaction and horror. "Daniel," he said. "They've identified him. It's the man from the CCTV. His name is Cyrus Thorne. He's been living just outside of town for years, working odd jobs, sometimes doing kids' parties, usually performing as clown with the traveling circus." And then Mark D dropped the bombshell that shattered my entire perception of justice, of reality itself. "There's something else, Daniel. Something the police. Well, they just announced it. Cyrus Thorne. He's Officer Jake's brother. His name is Jacob Thorne, but he goes by Jake. Cyrus is his older brother." My mind reeled. Officer Jake, the dismissive detective. The man who had refused to look beyond the surface, who had pushed the runaway theory, who had scoffed at Lisa's mention of a clown. He had been protecting him. My blood ran cold, a fury I hadn't known possible burning through my veins. This wasn't just incompetence. This was a conspiracy. This was betrayal. This was why Johnny's case, and perhaps others, had gone cold. The search for Cyrus Thorne became a frantic statewide manhunt. The focus shifted from a classic kidnapping for money case to something far more sinister. The police, embarrassed and now desperate to save face, converged on Cyrus's small, dilapidated house on the outskirts of Sarasota. They found him in the dead of night. Cyrus Thorne. They found him at his house. The news reports, careful not to be too graphic, hinted at a disturbing scene. But Mark D, he told me everything. He had seen it. And his voice, usually so steady, had trembled. They found the house quiet. Too quiet. No resistance. Just the scent. The metallic, cloying, sickeningly sweet scent of old blood mixed with something else. Something indescribably foul. It permeated the very air. After checking and securing the ground floor and first floor, they followed the stench down to the basement. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows. And what they saw there broke seasoned officers. Mark D had described it as a butcher house, but not for animals. There were crude hooks hanging from the ceiling, chain-stained tables covered in rusted implements, and the refrigerators, several of them, large industrial freezers. When they were opened, the horror became absolute. Packed in plastic bags labeled with dates and cryptic notes were human remains. Not just bones, but meat. The investigators quickly realized it wasn't just the recent victim. There were remains from multiple individuals, many, and they were all young. All boys: Cyrus Thorne, the friendly clown, the quiet neighbor, Officer Jake's brother. He was a cannibal. He had a taste for human meat, specifically young boys. The realization hit me with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. Johnny, my Johnny, could he be among them? The question was a burning acid in my gut. They found Cyrus in a sinister-looking clown getup, in a small, cramped room off the basement. Watching a silent TV, he offered no resistance. He didn't even speak. He just sat there. And then, as the officers cuffed him, as the flashing lights of police cars outside bathed the room in an intermittent, hellish glow, he looked at them, and he smiled. A wide, grotesque, utterly unrepentant smile that stretched across his face, not unlike the painted grin of Giggles. He had no shame, only a terrifying, depraved satisfaction. The DNA testing came back a few days later. Every sample from the remains in the fridge was analyzed, each one a gut punch, then the final crushing blow. Stored one of the samples, carefully labeled and stored, confirmed what I had already known in the darkest corners of my soul. It was Johnny, my 13-year-old son, John, his meat, confirmed via DNA. The world went silent. The sounds, the colors, the very air seemed to cease to exist. You know, there really aren't enough words to capture how that moment felt. It was just so dreadful, like everything around me vanished in an instant. The moment a father learns his son, his sweet, innocent boy, has been butchered and consumed by a monster wearing a clown's smile. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about revenge. It was about pure, unadulterated evil. Officer Jake was immediately arrested. The evidence was overwhelming. He'd been protecting his brother for years, tampering with evidence, burying leads, allowing other boys to disappear, covering up the monstrous truth to shield his own blood. The police department was rocked to its core. A criminal investigation of their own. Trust shattered, of unspeakable pain. I was left in a void of shock and despair, the kind of despair that makes breathing feel like an act of betrayal. My son was gone. My family was destroyed. Lisa didn't survive it. The revelation of what happened to Johnny, combined with the crushing guilt of having introduced him to that monster, of having dismissed my instincts, of her own fragile mental state, it was too much. She committed suicide a few weeks after Johnny's remains were confirmed. The last piece of my fractured family, gone. Cyrus Thorne, the cannibal clown, was found guilty on multiple counts of kidnapping, murder, and cannibalism. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, which was later converted to death by electric chair because of public and media pressure. He never spoke, never showed remorse, just that chilling, vacant smile. Officer Jake received a lengthy prison sentence for obstruction of justice and accessory to murder. A justice, I suppose, was served, but for me it was a hollow victory. There is no justice for a child lost in such a horrific way. It's 2025 now, 23 years. The world has changed. Technology has advanced. But the memory, the smell, the cold, gnawing terror of that time, it hasn't faded. I've lived with it, hidden it, tried to forget it. But the ghosts of Johnny, of Lisa, of the countless unknown boys whose lives were extinguished in that basement, they demand to be heard. I'm Daniel, and this is my story. It's a story of innocence betrayed, of justice corrupted, and of a darkness that walks among us, sometimes hidden behind a smiling face. A story of a pain that never truly heals, and a truth so horrifying it demands to be whispered into the world, so no one else ever has to meet the same fate as I did.